A story for children. Dear children, once upon a time there was an ugly frog. Yes, it was the ugliest frog in the world. Anyway, why is anything the worst anything? It is in our nature to compare things. We should not feel bad about this, but we should also be aware of how silly it is to look at a frog and think we know where it ranks on the best frogs of all time scale. Why do we even have the scale? They're frogs. Let them be. Welcome to the Frog Ranking Challenge. Please rank the frogs. This is a trick. It is not possible to rank the frogs. I think what I'm trying to say is there's no real way to tell who the ugliest frog is, and it doesn't particularly matter. But if it will be more exciting for you, we can say this is the ugliest frog. You've heard stories before, so right now you're probably thinking, yeah, but that's just where the frog starts. Surely the rest of the story is about the frog's journey to success. No, that is not where the story is going. First of all, there is no such thing as a successful frog. So is this true? Are all these frogs equal in ugliness or success? Well, let's make the question easier for a moment. Can we rank the frogs in terms of their orangeness? It seems reasonable to assume we can. The bright orange frog can come on top. Perhaps the blue frog with the orange speckles can come beneath it. Maybe the sexy frog can come next since it has the pink lipstick. Since pink probably approximates orangeness to some degree. Perhaps next would be the brown frog, because brown actually might be a secret dark orange. Then the big boy can come next because it's light green, and light green sometimes seems like yellow, and yellow seems like orange. Then finally, homeboy and dark green can come last. So there we have it. There's our ranking. It's not a particularly good ranking. Perhaps you could take issue with how I weighed some of the non-obviously orange frog components. Maybe you should say that the brown frog could be above the blue frog because having less orange hue spread out over a larger area might count more than having more hue concentrated in a smaller area. Or perhaps you could also say that I was biased towards the sexy frog for her good looks. You could say that there were some flaws in my measurement, but I don't think you could dispute the fact that some frogs are more orange than others, and that you could rank them based on their orangeness. We would just have to debate a bit more about how to weigh some of the imperfections on our scale, which could then be done through a tedious process. The same could be said for other characteristics of frogs. We could rank them based on height or weight, the number of offspring that they have, the amount of time spent on land versus in water. There are a handful of metrics by which we can rank the frogs. The real question is, can we rank them based on their success, or their ugliness, or as the comic will later imply, their beauty? We've already established that ranking frogs in general is indeed possible with trivial metrics. We just have to agree on exactly how to quantify it. So can we define and quantify ugliness, success, or beauty? Well, if we define those terms synonymous with orangeness, then we've already established that we can. If a successful frog is a more orange frog, then homeboy is looking fine and dandy. But I think we would all agree that that's a cheap cop-out. The real debate is, what is ugliness, success, or beauty? Objectively, universally, and independent of whatever we may want it to be. If we can define it and quantify it, then it would be possible to rank the frogs. Oh, I'm sorry. Does the frog have to be beautiful and successful before we can talk about it? Is that how the world works? We only get to talk about frogs who are amazing? Guess what, children? This isn't even a real story. It's just a ruse to teach you a lesson about life. I'm glad you asked, children. As far as we can tell, life does not have a point. There's no need to be frightened. Yes, an invisible stranger just told you that life is pointless. But much like the story, life doesn't need a point. I mean, it can have one if you want. Go ahead, pick one. Whatever you want. Count all the rocks. Get faster at singing. Be as nice as possible. Grow 500 pumpkins and put them in a pile. But there's nothing that requires life to have a point. Children, I'm trying my absolute best to explain the meaning of life to you. It's honestly sort of disturbing that you're stuck on the frog still. Do you know the frog? Does the frog need to be okay for you to be okay? What if I don't know what happened? The frog isn't real, okay? I made it up. There is no frog, life is pointless, and nobody knows what's going to happen. I'm very sorry to inform you of this, but if you grow up only reading happy stories where you find out the answers to all your questions, you will be scared and confused and probably die in a dumpster fire. It is better to accept the utter futility of things as early as possible and save yourself the struggle. It's odd that this lesson on the meaninglessness of life is foisted upon children. Children do not know what the meaning of life is because they're too young to have learned it yet. If this discussion were to be had with an adult, the adult would scoff and get back to working, practicing their instrument or playing with their kids. Adults have responsibilities to attend to, and outsiders foisting their insistence on the meaninglessness of life is not useful. In fact, it's generally insulting. Easier to foist this on kids, though, because kids have no meaning in life, right? They are the meaning to other people. You ask a child to produce a beautiful painting, the painting is not going to be beautiful. In fact, it's going to be quite the opposite. Hello. I'm an adult. And it sort of sounds like the point you're making might be that it doesn't matter if you're a reject because everything is pointless. Don't tell the children everything is pointless. I'm really sorry. Tell them a frog story. Notice that this new character is an adult himself. This sets him apart from children, but it also sets him apart from the narrator, the implication being that the narrator is not an adult. This is also evinced in the quality of the drawings, which are intentionally made to appear juvenile. The narrator is stuck in the middle ground, where she is clearly not among the band of kids she is preaching to as an authority figure, nor is she among the adults working with their horses or whatever. She's Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. Hello again, children. Once upon a time, there was an ugly frog. And the world isn't fair, so it didn't grow up to be pretty or successful. It just stayed how it was. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, the frog realized that everything is equally ridiculous, and it went sledding because why not? Is everything indeed equally ridiculous? If that's true, then everything is thus equally reasonable. If that's true, then everything is conversely equally reasonable. How do we know if something's ridiculous? We have to establish a goal, and then evaluate an action relative to that goal. If the action is relevant to achieving the aim, then it may be regarded as reasonable. If it's contrary to the aim, or at least indifferent, then it's likely ridiculous. Is there, then, a goal to existence? If there is, some things would be more ridiculous than others. Before I finish that point, though, I want to address the last sentence of the comic. And it went sledding because why not? There's a cheekiness to that statement and its lack of grammatical structure, so it seems like it does not want to be taken seriously. But that's exactly what I'm going to do anyway. Notice that the sentence itself is not an argument. Why not is not a reason. At best, it's a question, and a rhetorical one at that. It's like saying, who's to say? It's not an argument, it's a means of circumventing argument entirely. If that sentence were to make any grammatical sense, then her entire argument would have been invalidated. If the sentence were, and it went sledding because it was hungry, or because it wanted to find a nice girl frog, or even just because it enjoys sledding, then the sentence naturally implies that there's a reason to do things, or at least that the frog believes that there's a reason to do things. So suppose you have a frog in front of you, and you ask it why it went sledding, to which it responded because I wanted to. But you're a little more inquisitive of the frog, and you ask, why did you want to? The frog replies, because it's fun. So you ask, why is it fun? And the frog will start to get annoyed and say something like, because I like it. You know the game. Any intelligent child does. Why do you like it? Why, etc., etc. What's the answer to that question, though? Is it turtles all the way down, or is there a point where you can no longer ask why anymore? In Immanuel Kant's terms, this is the categorical imperative. That which is good for the sake of itself. That which moves everything else by being desired, by being loved. The ultimate reason why. You can answer that, then you can ground all of your values. They are good because of this categorical imperative. What then is the categorical imperative? I think we all know the answer, but we're just too afraid to say it. Kant certainly was. The answer is God, by definition. He's the first mover, the first principle, from which all things come and to which all things are directed. So then, beauty and ugliness, reasonableness and ridiculousness, success and failure, they all now have a standard, a metric. Once again, we can quibble about all those details, but that is indeed the answer. Before I sign off, I'd like to finish on a note from George Orwell. This is his essay entitled, Some Thoughts on the Common Toad, which I've abridged and think serves as a good counter to the comic on frogs. This was published in 1946, about 6 months after the end of World War II. Some thoughts on the common toad. Before the swallow, before the daffodil, not much later than the snowdrop, the common toad salutes the coming of spring after his own fashion, which is to emerge from a hole in the ground, where he has lain buried since the previous autumn, and crawl as rapidly as possible towards the nearest suitable patch of water. Something, some kind of shudder in the earth, or perhaps merely a rise of a few degrees in the temperature, has told him that it is time to wake up toward the end of Lent. His movements are languid but purposeful. His body is shrunken, and by contrast his eyes look abnormally large. This allows one to notice what one might not at another time, that a toad has about the most beautiful eye of any living creature. It is like gold, or more exactly, it is like the gold-colored, semi-precious stone which one sometimes sees in signet rings, and which I think is called chrysoberyl. A few more weeks and the water is alive with masses of tiny tadpoles, which rapidly grow larger, sprout hind legs, then forelegs, then shed their tails, and finally, about the middle of summer, the new generation of toads, smaller than one's thumbnail, but perfect in every particular, crawl out of the water to begin the game anew. I mention the spawning of toads because it is one of the phenomena of spring which most deeply appeal to me, and because the toad, unlike the skylark and the primrose, has never had much of a boost from poets. But I'm aware that many people do not like reptiles or amphibians, and I'm not suggesting that in order to enjoy spring, you have to take an interest in toads. There are also the crocus, the missel thrush, the cuckoo, the blackthorn, etc. The point is that the pleasures of spring are available to everybody, and cost nothing. Even the most sordid street, the coming of spring will register itself by some sign or other. If it is only a brighter blue between the chimney pots, or the vivid green of an elder sprouting on a blitzed site, it comes seeping in everywhere, like one of those new poison gases which pass through all filters. The spring is commonly referred to as a miracle. And during the past 5 or 6 years, this worn-out figure of speech has taken on a new lease of life. After the sort of winters we have had to endure recently, the spring does seem miraculous, because it has become gradually harder and harder to believe that it is actually going to happen. Ever since February 1940, I have found myself thinking that this time, winter is going to be permanent. But Persephone, like the toads, always rises from the dead at about the same moment. Suddenly, toward the end of March, the miracle happens and the decaying slum in which I live is transfigured. Down in the square, the sooty pivots have turned bright green, and the leaves are thickening on the chestnut trees. The daffodils are out, the wallflowers are budding, the policeman's tunic looks positively a pleasant shade of blue, the fishmonger greets his customers with a smile, and even the sparrows are quite a different color, having felt the balminess of the air, and nerved themselves to take a bath, their first since last September. Is it wicked to take a pleasure in spring and other seasonal changes? To put it more precisely, is it politically reprehensible while we are all groaning, or at any rate ought to be groaning, under the shackles of the capitalist system, to point out that life is frequently more worth living because of a blackbird's song, a yellow elm tree in October, or some other natural phenomenon which does not cost money or does not have what the editors of left-wing newspapers call a class angle? There is no doubt that many people think so. I know by experience that a favorable reference to nature in one of my articles is liable to bring me abusive letters, and though the key word in these letters is usually sentimental, 2 ideas seem to be mixed up in them. One is that any pleasure in the actual process of life encourages a sort of political quietism. People, so the thought runs, ought to be discontented, and it is our job to multiply our wants and not simply to increase our enjoyment of the things we already have. The other idea is that this is the age of machines, and that to dislike the machine, or even to want to limit its domination, is backward-looking, reactionary, and slightly ridiculous. The last idea is demonstrably false. Medieval literature, for instance, including the popular ballads, is full of an almost Georgian enthusiasm for nature, and the art of agricultural peoples, such as the Chinese and Japanese, center always round trees, birds, flowers, rivers, mountains. The other idea seems to me to be wrong in a subtler way. Certainly we ought to be discontented. We ought not simply to find out ways of making the best of a bad job, and yet if we kill all pleasure in the actual process of life, what sort of future are we preparing for ourselves? If a man cannot enjoy the return of spring, why should he be happy in a labor-saving utopia? What will he do with the leisure that the machine will give him? I've always suspected that if our economic and political problems are ever really solved, life will become simpler instead of more complex, and that the sort of pleasure one gets from finding the primrose will loom larger than the sort of pleasure one gets from eating an ice to the tune of a Wurlitzer. I think that by retaining one's childhood love of such things as trees, fishes, and butterflies, to return to my first instance, toads, one makes a peaceful and decent future a little more probable, and that by preaching the doctrine that nothing is to be admired except steel and concrete, one merely makes it a little surer that human beings will have no outlet for their surplus energy except in hatred and in leader worship. At any rate, spring is here, even in London, and they can't stop you enjoying it. This is a satisfying reflection. How many a time have I stood watching the toads mating, or a pair of hares having a boxing match in the young corn, and thought of all the important persons who would stop me enjoying this if they could. But luckily they can't. So long as you are not actually ill, hungry, frightened, or immured in a prison or holiday camp, spring is still spring. The atom bombs are piling up at the factories, the police are prowling through the cities, the lies are streaming from the loudspeakers, but the earth is still going round the sun, and neither the dictators nor the bureaucrats, deeply as they disapprove of the process, are able to prevent it.